I have a big problem because I have to stay here because of the microphone, and I'm not used to stand still. I like to sit on tables and walk around and get rid of my nerves, that is. And nerves, my God, I have nerves. When you asked me to come here to keep my last lecture, I was very frightened. I'll show you why. This is the mask of, perhaps you know it, Tutankhamun. He was a pharaoh and he died something like 1350 before Christ. He was the great father of Ramses II, perhaps you know him. And he was the guy when Moses went away in Genesis and Exodus, perhaps you know the story. It's a big book and this is the start of it. But the point is, his grave was discovered in 1926 or so. And all the discoverers died from a fatal disease shortly afterwards. And it is the same thing that happened with the people who have their last lecture. It was done in Harvard, that is a little place somewhere in America. And they started it up, and 6 months later the guy who did it for the first time died from a very fatal, of course he died fatal disease. I'm always wondering what's going to happen with me. And this is the original task I have to do. What wisdom would you try to impartare, that is Latin, on the world if you knew it was your last chance? And here, well, you cannot read it, but it's only to show that I'm going to tell you something, and there's a summary in about 35 minutes. I will start with a short introduction and layout of this presentation. And it goes like this. There's an introduction. I'm going to talk about things that interest me, about things that do not interest me, things I had to do, interesting yes or no, like teaching. That was not my first aim in my life. Some personal views, education about mostly liberal arts and science, and some take-home message, and I hope for the rest of your life, at least it is mine, because I'm at the end, because it's my last lecture. The Old Man and the Sea. That is the title of a rather famous book of a guy called Ernest Hemingway. I thought he was American, but he's British, by the way, but he lived in... there's something else. When I was a young boy once, my father had a friend, and he was called Dick Bruna. And Dick Bruna is the guy who drew all the Nijntje things. And he also did the Zwarte Beertjes, perhaps some people, elderly people here in the audience know that. And well, this is Nijntje from the sailor, the matroos. I always give it to people with some connection with sailing. And to be honest, this was my first impression. Look at the year, 1956, that's almost archaeology. But I went with my parents to the island of Terschelling, and I had to wait in the harbor of Harlingen for the boat. And this was the boat. It was the largest one I've ever seen. And it was the largest one that I saw before I was 40 years old or something like that. It's just a ferry, the Friesland. And it made an impression unbelievable. And I wanted to go to sea. And this is, by the way, Key West. This is somewhere in Florida. This is Sloppy Joe's, well, booze joint, actually. And this is where Ernest Hemingway wrote his book, The Old Man and the Sea. And here you see him with his beard, and there's every year a competition of people looking like him. And who looks most like Ernest Hemingway? This Ernest Hemingway, these are lookalike. You can drink there. So I wanted to go to sea, but life is not always going smoothly. I finished high school when I was 16. That was terrible, not because I was clever, but I was born in September, and I went to the HBS, and that was 5 years, so I was 16 when I finished high school. And I was not allowed to go to the Merchant Navy Academy because I was simply too young. So there was a plan B, and that was close by because my parents lived in the street where the university hospital was in Utrecht, Nicolas Beekstraat. So I worked since I was 15, actually, a year before that already, as a kind of male nurse in the hospital, and I had to clean floors. And I had to, things that interested me, and I had to clean floors. And what I saw was when it was Grand Round, there were a lot of very famous professors, and they told terrible things to patients, and they didn't explain anything. They just told it, you have an acute appendicitis and it had to be removed, otherwise you get a very chronic peritonitis, you will presumably die from it. Words like that. And I had to explain it. Well, I didn't have to explain it, I did, and I learned to explain difficult things in an easy way. And perhaps that was the way I tried to learn something to other people, and I'm very afraid it was the reason why I had to start teaching. Look here. No, that's not all. There were persons in the hospital in those days that were very sick. That's normal in the hospital, you understand that. But there were persons with attractive complications. And one of the complications they got was what you mentioned, bed sores. Pressure ulcers, they called it in English. And that was terrible because you could not treat it. People were smelling like you were in an abattoir. It smells like death. They were lying in separate, isolated rooms, and there was nobody coming there. Not the grandchildren, their own children once a week perhaps, because they were smelling and they were going to die. And since there was no one who could actually do something about it, well, I could do because I was only a male nurse and I was a medical student, and you can do nothing wrong. When they die, by the way, who cares? And I started to be interested in the fate of those people, and it is not like a very deep emotion, but I always thought when you study medicine you must do not only something about DNA and chemotherapy and highbrow, sexy, glossy things like everybody does now, but you care for people, and caring for people was something that was brought in by my family. My mother was a nurse, and, well, I learned that, that's all. End of the story. This is Tuscany. I made the pictures myself. They're terrible. I'm not very familiar with PowerPoint, so please accept my apologies. But this is about a place called San Gimignano. Perhaps you know it. It is the New York of the Middle Ages. It's also called like that. A lot of all those people, they were all bankers, and they had to isolate themselves when there was a kind of a economic crisis, and they went back with their bonuses. That's where the name bonus 2, bonus 3, and the Middle Ages, and we still don't learn from it. And there was a church there, and there is a beautiful fresco series, and one of them was this one. And it was painted by Domenico Ghirlandaio. And Ghirlandaio is the teacher of a guy called Michelangelo. Perhaps you've heard about it. He is a guy with all those large statues. He didn't know how to keep size. Michelangelo. And Ghirlandaio, 1485. And this is a girl, and she is a saint. So you see she has something like a mirror behind her. And the Santa Fina, the Holy Ant. When you look at her, there's a girl of 12 years old. And she died because there was a guy who presented her with an orange. An orange. 24 in a net in Albert Heijn for €2 this week. But in those days it was unbelievably precious. Why? It was difficult to grab it from the tree exactly at the good moment, to get it orange before it's rotting. And that was difficult in those days. And she got this orange from that boy, and she felt a very strange feeling somewhere below her navel. And we call this now butterflies or love or something like that, but she was in the 14th century, she was not allowed to answer to that. So she said, this is a punishment of God, and I'm going to dedicate the rest of my life to him or her, him in those days. And she lay down on a plank, on a wooden shelf, and she didn't eat anymore. And after some weeks, we know from the Irish struggles in the Protestant and the Catholics, etc., that you die after about 36, 40 days when you don't eat. And when she died, she was grown completely fixed to her plank, and they had to tear her from this plank. And at that moment, they saw that there were beautiful flowers growing from these pressure ulcers, of course. Beautiful flowers, and this is the first representation in history of broccoli. Do you see it? But this is it. And it was, she is now, well, nobody thought about it anymore, but this was strange, and it had to do something with, why is this little girl emotioning me? That is strange. And then I had to think about my pressure ulcers again. And then I started to look at, hey, how can you do it? And nobody was interested to start with. They laughed at me. You have to do something biochemical. You have to look at tertiary, quaternary structures, and you have to look at receptors. That's very interesting. But I thought about those people 15 years earlier when I was a male nurse, and it was terrible. So I said, hey, I studied medicine. Is it possible to make something up from it? Yes, I could, because I had, well, my PhD already. Could I do something? Yeah, but what do you do? Well, look at the stages. Could I see something like, is there an order of developing, going this and that, was going like this? It was possible. Eventually, it was accepted in a European pressure also advisory panel that is a part of the University of Oxford, that is in England, a little city. And we made stages, and we could actually look under the microscope and recognize this. And when you know what stages are in the process, you can actually look at what the reasons of the appearance of this disease of complication is. It's nice, eh? When I saw this picture, there's only a bill, a buttock. But when you look properly, you see that there is the deposition of, yeah, it's a little bit strange one. This is rust. F-E-O, chemically, rust. And when you know there's rust, there must be the deposition of red blood cells, because red blood cells have a lot of iron in the cells. And when you know what red blood cells do, you know where they come from, namely from capillaries, so you know what the reason is of this whole thing. And then you get this one. This is the Bill's plate, we call it. This is the cause of death. No, it's not the cause of death. It's not 2 legs, and this is your blood. Doesn't matter. But you see here another strange thing from early days. It's what we call a kissing ulcer. A kissing ulcer. It starts here, and because it is humid, and there is some white blood cells coming out, and some proteins, and some enzymes, the other one is going with it. And when you look here, you see beautiful, you see these little red points. That is when you shave yourself and you fall, those are the capillaries you see through the skin. And this is vital tissue, only there's no tissue surrounding it. This is a wound. Recognizing it. This is terrible. Please don't look when you do social science or humanities, and this is nice. This is, again, this is your sacral area, and this is a wound you can put your 2 fingers in, your 2 hands in. And this is undermined even. You can go underneath these ribs here. And this is stage 4 pressure also. You can understand it's very difficult to cure this. You need plastic surgery. You need a lot of things to cure it. Oh, well, I published it in the Netherlands Journal of Medicine, called it like that, Nederlands Tijd voor Geneeskunde in those days. And there was a reply by a plastic surgeon who said immediately, this guy is crazy. He is insane. And he came with this book, Dr. O. Dr. Knot, Gekke Geneeskunde in Grootvaders tijd. And I was shocked. I was shocked by, why don't you take me seriously? It's a very serious subject. I tried to do it. It's not science. There's nothing to do with DNA, there's nothing to do with biochemistry, but it is about people. And why don't you take me seriously? And then I started with, why don't we do it like everybody does? I do epidemiology. I'm going to see what is the magnitude of the problem. And I started only to look in the whole hospital, 1,000 people, just looking, is it actually a problem? And we saw this is the curve of the number of patients, and you saw that was in well, stage 4, etc., more than 16 patients, well, it could make a distinction between surgical wards, where they cut you, and non-surgical wards, like neurology, internal medicine, eye disease, and things like that. The lighter Mont Ventoux, also called the midlife mountain. Okay, and there were some peaks in it, and this was a very sad peak, because these were all females with cervical cancer of the uterus, young females, 50, 40 years old, with very large operation problems. These were young guys who had their motorbike for the first time and collided with, well, they had a spinal cord lesion, and that is what you see now in the Hoogstraat rehabilitation center. It was typical, you could identify, but look at the spectrum. Elderly people, young people, 20 or 30 years, and elderly people. And the older you get, the more problems you have. Look at the government at this very moment. We all grow 106 years old, and then suddenly we die during our sleep in the night, of course. And we are all healthy, and we never have complaints. That's why our weight goes up to 90 years if you are at that age. But everybody forgets that we get older because we can treat diseases of old age. When you get a pneumonia, I give you antibiotics. In the earlier days you died. When you break your hip, we can put new on it. In earlier days you died. So we grow older. But you do not grow older healthy. That's a big problem, realize that. This is how you not grow old healthy. This is not a good position to ventilate your lungs, etc. But there is something about mattresses, and I try to make pictures, and they're terrible because I make them myself. It's the same growth, but they just grow back to essence. You have to problem with her knees. She probably played hockey in earlier years. One of the principles is when you lie down somewhere, you have a body weight, and your body weight is something, 70 kilos or so. Take it. When you lie down, it's quite simple. When you spread the surface where you lie on, you can reduce the pressure on your, well, where you lie on, actually. You can understand the more pressure on one point, the more chance you will have to get an ulcer. Quite simple. I like it, because it was difficult to get this point exactly there. It's still really, but it is not fair, because like, it's difficult to turn it around, but I managed. But this is much better, and you can see that you just give some support to very more places. This is the hammock effect. What is it? We always think that when you lie down on a very soft mattress, or even on a waterbed, this is great. And we actually measured it. It was proven a waterbed has a sex ratio of 8.9, but a comfort ratio of 1.2. I don't know what the sex ratio and the comfort ratio is, but you understand that it has to do something with it and something not. What's the whole point? When you lie on a waterbed, it is not the water that is determining your comfort, but it is the shear of the cover surrounding it that causes it. And then I thought, hey, that is typical, perhaps I can do something, some extra effect. This is called bottoming. This is when you go to Yosemite and you take this very little thing and you think you lie comfortable. You think, because they told you that at the store where they said you lie comfortable. Crazy. You lie only 1 centimeter or so. Do you think it's comfortable? No, of course not. But you are so awake that you can run for this bear that is trying to invade your tent, and that's why they have these small things. That's not comfortable. And this is, here you see the pressure is a red arrow, you can make it. And this is also typical. People who are sick lie down. But when you get better, you try to rise up, and then the nurse comes and says, shall I shake up your what's the name? Pillows, good, you're listening. The pillows, and then you sit here. But what's happening is you tend to go this way, you tend to go down. And most beds have here something like, well, it stops you, kind of buffer for train, and you don't glide out of it. But here you get the combination, that's the buttocks, a combination of pressure going in this direction and shear forces. And the two make your skin very vulnerable to develop your pressure ulcers. We know that now. And your heels. Those are the typical places for pressure ulcers. We know. Quite simple. Nothing science, just look. And this is nice, eh? Do you see it writing down? I only could find an arrow to illustrate, but it took me half an hour to... I'm proud of it. And then I had the invention of my life. There was a guy from a foam mattress industry, and now you see him every day on the television making the Tempur mattress. Perhaps you've seen it. They don't have mattress anymore needed in hospitals because everyone has now a mattress, and they still have the factory, so they make it now for everybody. But what did I see? Hey, when I have this hammock effect, and I can just cut the surface of the mattress in small pieces, not totally, but only to half or something like that, well, there is not the hammock effect anymore, and I still have this pressure relieving effect. He earned a large house, and I didn't have any idea about a patency or something like that, so he is rich and I'm not. But this was important. And what did he do more? We knew already from the 20s of the last century that when you lie patient in what we call the semi-Fowler position, that is a kind of wedging, they don't slide out of the bed and stay with their buttocks here. Do you see what the difference is? And we did it. And eventually, oh yeah, and there were always guys, well, we know when there's pressure, so we relieve the pressure. That's quite simple. And these were all nurses and psychologists and social science, so I could not illustrate to them, listen, the body weight remains the same. So when I remove a part, it means that around that removed part, the pressure must be higher. It's quite simple. Now they didn't believe me. Well, belief and proof is something scientific. And here, there was the study of Alistair MacLeod, I know him very well, and he had an ability to measure pressure. And here you see what's happening. When you remove a part from the body, you see the pressure is zero, nothing. And you see there's an increasing pressure, even 75, 81, 89, around it, much higher. And when you know that you occlude veins, the outgoing vessels of tissue with about 20 millimeters of mercury, you can understand that this whole area is not supplied with blood, meaning you get pressure ulcers. Quite simple. And then I thought something very strange, perhaps we can make it a little bit moving so that you do it. Well, we made what we call a low air loss bed, and every hospital uses now. Really. And that's nice. And they earn money with it, you don't believe it. And I was suddenly in the Daily Express, believe it or not. This is the ward where we're trying this floating patients on air experiment you've been reading about. They laughed about it. It's okay, I don't care, but it worked. And then there was a patient who went to the Dead Sea, not to die, but it is an area in Israel, and it is very low, and it's very salt, and you almost float on it. And that's what you see here. Why don't we make a kind of a basin where you can lie in? Did you ever swim? Are there people who swim here? You are from the Netherlands, I hope? You have a diploma even? B or C? C even. Well, okay. When you are in the bed, in your bath, swimming pool the whole day, you can pull your skin almost from your body. That is one of the restrictions of Olympic swimming. You cannot go faster because otherwise you lose the skin. And that's true. And then we thought, hey, why can't we make something like take silicone sand grains like that and make a large airflow through it and make it kind of floating. And we made it. It is the air fluidized bed that is introduced, and we use it in the intensive care ward in all hospitals in the Netherlands. It is expensive, but it works. And here you see this is nice. This is a male patient. You cannot see this because his glockenspel is on the other side. we did experiments just to look what pressure do you perform when you lie on, well, several layers on a bed, on a couch, things like that. This is what we saw under the MRI scan, magnetic resonance imaging. And this is turned 180 degrees because he's lying here. You can see this is prostate. And we can see here are the buttocks. And these are beautiful developed muscles. There's a layer here of fat. That's normal. You like that, yes or no? But that is the way it works. And even Kate Moss has a layer here. And when you lie on a plank, you see this. Do you see the difference? Look here. You see that it's completely flat. This is the plank here, completely flat. And you can actually see that there's a striping here. And this striping means that there is a going down of the bloodstream. And where do you see pressure? This is mainly here, in the sacral area, the end arteries for the medical students in the audience. Perhaps you know that. This is the functional end artery. And then I took my little Haalboom mattress, they called it eventually. Look here, these are the blocks we made. Do you see that it's much better? That the perfusion is better? I like it. This is one of the co-assistants we and, this is a pig. It could be the same, of course, but he was not asking for this stuff. Okay. And this is a pig. And he was about 6 weeks old, and it's terrible because we sacrificed those pigs. But we had to do it. There were people we liked to use also, but they didn't give us the possibility to do it. And what did we do? They are under anesthesia. They didn't feel anything. Don't worry. This is done very nicely. And the apparatus here is exactly the same we use for humans when they undergo operations. So we try to do it as good as possible, and as little animals as possible. And what did we do? We applied by means of these pressure apparatus a pressure of about 100 millimeters of mercury. That is halfway venous pressure, diastolic and systolic pressure when you look at blood pressure. And we did it for 1 hour. And then we took a sample under a microscope, and then an hour later we took another sample. And as we see, this is immediately after the release of the pressure, nothing. This is completely normal muscular tissue, it's beautiful. You see the blood vessels here, you see here, well, to be honest, I don't see striation when it is striated muscle, but it's only when you look very properly. And an hour later is this. And what you see here is massive influx, we call it white blood cells. You see that the cells here are lighter than they were in this picture. picture just believes me that it's true. And this is the example of massive inflammation. And this is the start of pressure ulcers. And when we looked under the electron microscope, we still see capillary here, the wall, endothelium. There's a red blood cell, there's a red blood cell. These are platelets. And this is the white blood cell. The white blood cell is crawling through the wall of the blood vessel. And that is the proof of what we call oxygen-free radical activity. That's the basis of the whole thing. You occlude something, and then you open it, and then the oxygen actually, God gives to the world, oxygen is killing you. It's not the apple, it's not the snake, it's oxygen. Eventually there was a richtlijn Kubicus in the Netherlands. I was president of that, and we did it in Europe, etc. And this is my big achievement. I'm very proud of that, to be honest, and humble and proud. This was in 1984, and you saw that the stages 1 and 2, the early stages, and 3 and 4, the more difficult ones, were about even. And some years later, 14 years later, we saw that it was mostly stage 1 and 2, and only some patients had 3 and 4. It went down. But this is also important. In 1984, 11% of all patients had a kind of a pressure ulcer, and in 1998, only 6%. And that is an achievement. And what was very nice is that now in the Netherlands, when you look at the Algemeen Dagblad, there is a listing of hospitals, etc. And one of the first things you have to look at, what is the incidence and prevalence of pressure ulcers. And that's what I did actually. There it is. Dan moet ik even in het Nederlands. Het is altijd hetzelfde. Ik heb mijn kinderen gevraagd om eruit te blijven. Verdorie zitten iedere keer die platen in. Oké, we go on. Here we have Santa Fina again. And you see again broccoli. And why, again, what did she do? Why was her... And now it's 2012. It is May last year. And I was with my wife to the endocrinology conference in Florence. And we had a hotel that was very close to the Ospedale dello Innocenti. There's an orphanage house, and you may not go in there. It's not a museum or so. But, well, we are Dutch, so... Look at all these. These are very old... These things are from the 13th century, and they are sponsored by Pampers. The Pamperi. And we saw on the first floor this painting. And this painting struck me because I recognized not the painting, but I recognized, well, look here, that's the ox. Do you see the ox? This is the east, and the ox is Lucas. And Lucas is our evangelist, the painter, and the doctor, we believe. They believe. But there was something, this is painted by Ghirlandaio. That was the guy from San Gimignano. And this is the guy, this is Ghirlandaio himself. Do you see him? He looks a little bit soft. I don't believe it either, but I can pay for it. Look here, here is he. And so the circle is round. And then I thought about, this is nice. We turned around and we saw this thing. These were little children here sitting in front of a picture of, I think it is St. Ursula. I don't know why. Ursula. And this was the teacher. And she was explaining to these little children about painting, about history, about Italy, about art, about common knowledge. I was very impressed, like, look at these faces, 5 years old. I have a grandson, 4 years old, he's much more clever, but these are girls. I realized the basis of liberal arts and science. I'm very serious. I always make pictures I can use for a presentation. The earlier you start, the more you learn to wonder, and the more eventually the spin-off will be. That's my opinion. This is why, and this is free, competence-driven education only leads to intellectual poverty or to nothing. You can forget it immediately, but I've said it, I could not forget. So, hey, this is French for people who come from Canada. Part 3, talking about less moving and less interesting things, for me that is. When I started to be an internist after my medical degree, I had to do a special subject to write a thesis, and my professor told me you have to do something about salts getting rid medication, that is diuretics, and about potassium homeostasis. Well, I did because he was the boss, and the motto of the whole thing now is you must always be prepared to do things you perhaps primarily do not feel attracted to. This is my PhD thesis in 1980, he's born from Münchhausen, and he is a guy, there's a lot of stories about him, and he made it up from, well, he could draw himself from his hair out of a swamp, for instance, and nobody believed it, but I like it because there's a horse. You see it? There's a horse and he's cutting too. And there's a story that he had to run for the Turks, this is in Vienna, and they dropped the iron, well, what was it, a kind of a door behind it, and the horse didn't feel anything, but the horse one side was on the other side of the Turks, and one side was here, and he was drinking, and it went away. This is what's happening when you take diuretic drugs. You drink, and you lose it here, and you get all the consequences eventually. That is the way I understood it. And I always had to think, hey, what is happening, what's happening? It's Kuifje, Tintin, perhaps you see it. And this is a general practitioner. And this is the blood pressure recording, see it? And he always asks, what's happening, what's happening, what's happening? And I'm the internist, so I have to say, this is what's happening. And that's what I like about my subject. So I saw in Rome this guy, he's called Titus. And he was the guy who defeated the Jews in 69 after Christ. And here you see the menorah that was taken from the temple in Jerusalem and taken to Rome. And he only lived for 2 years. He only was emperor for 2 years. Why did he die so young? Well, there's a book that every emperor dies from stabbing. They don't die from natural causes, except for August. But all the other ones, Octavian, but all the other ones die from stabbing. No, he died from something else, and I can illustrate it to you. Now, a part only for people, not medical, but more, let's say, social side or the soft side of the world. What do you see? Typically in Afro-Americans, I had a hobby in high blood pressure, and I went to a lot of American conferences about it, and there was suddenly a row going on. Hey, that's typical. We have people, and usually they are from African offspring, call it like that, and they have a very early onset of high blood pressure. It occurs in most of them. They have much more strokes, that is cerebral bleeding or something like that, much more heart infarctions, and they have much more problems with their kidneys. And the blood pressure level is much higher than in whites. And 10 years ago, it was not allowed even to speak about it because it was considered to be discrimination. And now suddenly people realize that it could be something else. And I was trying to find it out. I'm interested in history. This is a replica of a retour ship, we call it. And this actually was going to Indonesia, what we call now Indonesia. But at the West Indies Company, you had exactly the same. And when you look here and where they call it the slaves, where they came from, and it's this area in Africa, Liberia, Ghana, Nigeria, those are the countries where they come from. Not from Mozambique, where would you go all the way around. So they came here. They were actually not taken only by the Dutch, we were only transporting them. We had no failure, it is not our fault. It were the Arabs who brought them actually to the Dutch people. And we said only, well, we transport them, of course. And here you see a ship from the 17th or 18th century, and look at all these people. This is unbelievable where they're lying. This is on one deck below, and this is the upper deck where you also do all the, this is the main mast, you see it, this is the foremast, and this is the bazaanmast, we call it. And I always wondered, how is it possible that you can keep all these people quiet? What do you do? They were in chains. Do you know why? When they stand up all, and they all go to starboard, the ship capsizes. It's quite simple. They had to be chained on their place. And then I had to think about, well, quite simple. I went to an archive. And this is the archive of the West Indies Company. And just see what's standing here. 160 to 170 last. Last is a weight measurement, like a ton something, it's 2 tons actually. 300 to 400 Negroes, they called them in those days, in one ship. Now look, and this is liberal arts and science. We have learned to calculate. We even do it without a pocket Japanese calculator. Trip to America, 42 days. Number of slaves, 300. That was on this one, you see it. The body weight, they were healthy guys. About 70 kilos. The total of only the slaves is about 21 tons, we call it. The drink water you need is 2 liters per day. 300 people, 42 days is 25 tons, only drinking water. In ship, do you believe it? This is a beautiful ship. It is the Duifken. It is made in Australia and it sailed back to Den Helder about 10 years ago. Look here. This is the same Duifken with half wind. Now look here. Do you see it? It's almost capsizing only with wind. Where do you leave all your water? Look here. When you take buckets of water or tons of water, where do you place them? When you take one from starboard side, do you take another one from port side, or how do you do that? Simply they didn't have enough water. And only the people who survived the drought, who survived 42 days on the sea without enough drinking water, they are the Afro-Americans with now high blood pressure. They had a tendency to retain sodium, to retain water. And do you find it crazy that they have a different type of high blood pressure than well, Anglo-Saxon Americans have? And this is nice. My son worked in the Merchant Navy, and I told them a little bit about it. They said, well, it's very simple. Just guess what's happening. You have a cruise ship of 2,000 passengers and 600 rating, and they all get 4 days of diarrhea. How many rolls of toilet paper do you need? That's what we call logistics. Here you see that. It's great. It's 2,000 passengers. That's 2,500. Unbelievable. And this is what happened in 1968. Tony Smith and John Carlos, those two people, you see the black gowns they have here, and they said for the first time, we are our own people, we have our own history, we want to be treated like our own history. And here you see what people did with it. This is a very large study we took over in the Netherlands. I'm not going to explain it in extenso. It's called the Allhead study. And they looked at a diuretic and calcium antagonist, we call it an ACE inhibitor, 3 types of medication for high blood pressure. And they followed people, 40,000 people, a lot, for 5 years, and there was no difference in medication. It meant that when you give the expensive one or the cheap one, the result is the same. But this is a diuretic, and it proved that when you look better at Afro-Americans, they developed at a very large rate diabetes, type 2 diabetes. Not in the ACE inhibitor part, but in the diuretic part, meaning you give them a cheap medication and they die much earlier. And that's only because you want to have money. And that is why in the Netherlands, general practitioners used the same study, because they didn't know what the difference was between white and black. Do you know why he died? Quite simple. He looks like a tenore napolitano. He is delivering pizza, and that's why he's fat. He had diabetes, high blood pressure, etc. Well, it's the end of the story. Already 2,000 years ago. And that's something about myself, and the motto is follow your ambitions and develop your talents, please. That's me. I have talents. This is a pencil, and this is my bear, and it's still in my, well, that doesn't matter. But look here. This is the table where my father was drawing, and he was graphic working, and he learned me to look at things. I couldn't draw, he was much better, but I learned to look at things. For instance, do you see this? This is called the Lamb of God. It's one of the most famous paintings in Ghent. It is the start of the Renaissance. It's considered to be the start of oil painting. The brothers van Eyck. And look what's here. This is fantastic. The Dom Tower. They considered the Dom Tower the most beautiful edifice of, well, those years. And look at it. It's like, hey. Do you see that the balance of the painting is totally gone when you only change this little subject here? I'm not talking about the Pope, I'm not talking about this the Pope, not talking about the Emperor, no, this is the Pope, that's the Pope. They're all wearing straight clothes. Don't worry. There's a lamp here. The lamp with a B. Look here, this is the same. It took me hours. Here's another one. He told me, look at it. This is fantastic. This is the Leaning Tower in Pisa. And everybody likes it. But do you like it when it is like this? It is only a tower. It is not. Look here. I'm proud of it. I do it another time. Well, I learned to draw, and my father. So I made a lot of ties, and this is the logo for the Unit Association Sons. I'm wearing the tie now. It's nice. I paint a little bit. I like it. And I play with electric trains. And this is on my school, 1960. And this is what I still have. And this is, oh, my grandson. This is my electric train. Don't you like it? I like it. This is very important because this is genotype and phenotype. The genotype is loving train. The phenotype is bring it out and learning to do it as early as possible. So I teach him to love trains. And I look again at these little children in Florence, in Firenze. The earlier you start, this was my school, and this was a teacher who taught us to look at things and to wonder, and yeah, but don't take it for granted. Why do you believe everybody? Now again, this is Tuscany, July 1956. My excuses for the strange clothes is I was not allowed to choose them myself in those days. But I learned to play on the beach. And what you see here is typically Dutch. You make a little fortress and you dig a canal to the sea. And what you hope is that these waves enter the canal and eventually they go around it. Where you see here. Do you see it? It goes around. And this is typical. You see that the canal is collapsing. It is not going wider, it is collapsing. That's strange. And now look here. This is an aneurysm of the abdominal aorta. And what's actually happening, the bloodstream goes down. And it's good when your blood vessels are very elastic. But when they are very tough, when they are arteriosclerotic, there's calcium deposit in the wall, they tend to go back. And here, at this area, they collide with the next wave from the heart. And that's why you see aneurysm of the aorta usually happening just below the renal artery. Hey, that is strange. How on God's earth do you find this very strange thing on the beach, holiday, loving your children, it's beautiful here, sunbath, and you think about a pathophysiological phenomenon. And that again is liberal arts and science. You put it in it and you can try to make a combination eventually. So I think, and that's really thinking, teaching must only be done by charismatic, motivated, enthusiastic and well-experienced teachers, tuitioned by role models. Teachers must dare to show their passion and emotions for their profession, that is, but also for their education. The basis of education must be a broad interest and a spirit that wanders all the time. Competent-driven education only in fashion now is perhaps okay for, I don't know what the name in English is, HBO, but it's eventually the end of universal knowledge and the end of university. You may kill me, but that's what I think. Successful teaching is a talent that cannot be learned by every individual. Education courses, obliged for every employee now, can also result in non-motivated or even frustrated people who, per definition, are not successful in education. There was a guy called Derksen. He was a famous professor in Brussels, and he had much to do, he was a psychologist, he had a lot of employees, he worked a lot, etc. And he said, it is terrible, when I give my lecture in the audience hall, they are knitting, they are reading the paper, they are working on the internet, they must just stop giving lectures like this. And I said, no, you cannot give lectures, that's the whole problem. Because when you walk, are you working with the paper now? No. You read it already, I suppose, but okay. That's the way it works. And the best motivation is the enthusiasm of your own students. And I have some, well, I was so emotional that they are not sharp, but that is, well, maybe more sharp, you see them. And wandering as an integral part of liberal arts and science should be stimulated starting as early as in primary school. And the educational system in the Netherlands leads eventually not back to the future, but back to the past. Hey, it's there, not to the future. And finally, and that's my summary, I think, follow your own drive, your own emotions, follow and develop your own talents, be willing to do all those things you primarily do not like, teaching, but never lose sight of your ideas. And be surprised about everything beautiful you see around you day by day. That's not religious, it's true. And do not forget it. And this is what happened when Carter opened the graveyard, the door to the grave chamber of the burial chamber of Tutankhamun. He asked Lord, can I use the payer for it? Well, can I do anything? And he said, yes, wonderful thing. And that's not only in the grave. Remember, this is the ship, and this is the same one in Enkhuizen. I was so disappointed. It is a small boat. It can only go